it was causing me to ask, does Christianity make sense? And I got stuck in this drawn out season of doubt while pastoring a large growing church and while doing lots of videos for my 1 Minute Apologist ministry, and finding myself wondering, am I going to be an apostate? And it was a very scary thought.
Hey guys, I'm Bill Westers, and this is the Encountering Truth podcast. Welcome to the Encountering Truth podcast, where we examine the evidence for Christianity, engage culture with kindness and conviction, and encounter Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life. Well, I cannot be more excited about this episode. I have an incredible guest with me. My guest today has 2 doctorates, a Doctor of Ministry in Apologetics from the Southern Evangelical Seminary, a PhD in the Philosophy of Religion from the University of Birmingham in England. He's also the co-host of the nationally syndicated radio program called Pastor's Perspective. He hosts the YouTube channel Christianity Still Makes Sense, formerly known as the 1 Minute Apologist. He's the lead pastor at Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and he is the author of multiple books, including Does God Exist?, Doubting Toward Faith, and, of course, his most recent brand new book, Does Christianity Still Make Sense? A Former Skeptic Responds to Today's Toughest Objections to Christianity. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only pastor, apologist, and author, Dr. Bobby Conway. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bobby.
Hey, Bill, it's good to see you again, buddy. And I appreciate you having me on your show.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming on here. We're super excited. Now, that's a quite a list of accolades there that I just read off, Bobby. But what stands out to me, there's something that has played another key role in your walk with Christ, and that's just the fact that it hasn't always been a bed of roses, right? You've gone through some rough times of doubt and addiction, and of course, I believe you call it the long, dark night of the soul. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and what how God brought you through all of that, and what brought you to write this book, Does Christianity Still Make Sense?
Yeah, sure, Bill. So after becoming a Christian as an adult, I threw myself hook, line, and sinker into my faith. And I ended up, after quite a few years, in a deep season of doubt, wrestling through some of the various questions that are put to us as Christians. And I found myself struggling because I was reading so much, but it felt as if I couldn't track down the answers to all of the doubts that I had. And as I've said before, all doubts entail questions, but not all questions entail doubt. And so what was taking place is I found that it was deeper than just questions I was asking. It was causing me to ask, does Christianity make sense? And I got stuck in this drawn out season of doubt while pastoring a large growing church and while doing lots of videos for my 1 Minute Apologist ministry, and finding myself wondering, am I going to be an apostate? And it was a very scary thought. I wasn't looking to be, combative to Christianity. I was just studying a bunch and I could not put it all together. And so what was happening, for every book I read to try to address one set of doubts, I would collect a whole bunch more doubts and learn a bunch more books that I needed to read. And so I had to figure out a way to be in a relationship to my thinking about things that didn't cause me to, always be in this lifelong Q&A session with Jesus. So that's what was happening. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the word apostate, being a near apostate. Now, that's not a word that a lot of people use so much today. Can you explain a little bit of what that means, or what that meant for you, and maybe what brought you back from the edge of apostasy?
Sure, yeah, and that's perceptive, Bill. In fact, I wanted the subtitle of my book, Does Christianity Still Make Sense?, to be a near apostate answers today's biggest objections. But Tyndale Publishing said most people aren't going to know what apostate is. So they said a former skeptic. An apostate is essentially a person who goes away from the faith. So it comes from the Greek word apostolos. It's a going away. It's a leaving. It's a ditching. And so it's kind of what happened with Judas in the Bible, or Demas, who was in love with the world. And so I felt like I was hanging by a thread. And the doubts were agonizing. Ended up on antidepressants and counseling, suicidal ideation. I mean, it was very, very painful. And the reason I think it was painful is because of how close my relationship to Jesus was. I mean, I really was committed, and to feel like it was being torn away from me, I felt God forsaken. It felt like I could not sense God's presence. I felt a palpable loneliness and despair in my soul. And it was really thick, empty, and dark. And it wasn't something during that season, like there was not some big hidden sin in my life. I wasn't like into pornography. I wasn't out cheating on my wife. I was studying a bunch. I was a geek who was reading it, just was getting met with these questions. And, you know, the good news is God ended up bringing me through it in time, thankfully, and got 2 books out of it. And that's the greatest thing about the Lord. Like you can't imagine sometimes what's going on. Mm-hmm. And to think that I've been out of that now for almost a decade, and just to sense his presence again, and to think about what he wants me to do in ministering to doubters. It's kind of crazy how he takes your greatest pain and he'll give you a ministry out of it.
Right. Yeah, definitely. It's not all things are good, but God works all things for the good of those who love him. And that's an amazing story. Now, I think you said in your book something like it was not some apologetic argument that brought you back, but returning to the faith of a child. Like one of our things on this podcast is that encounter with Jesus. And unfortunately, not a lot of people, a lot of people that would go through something like that would not necessarily find their way back. There's the big trend of deconstruction today that, we had someone on the podcast, David Wolcott, in our last episode, talking about how the deconstruction has led to the progressive Christianity, and it's unfortunate. And so, and one of those things that a lot of times is a common story in those deconstruction stories is some sort of scandal or hypocrisy within the church that has really kind of felt like that's pushed them out of the church and even in some cases away from Christianity altogether. So that's actually one of the things that you talk about in your book, Bobby. So why are there so many scandals in the church and with this hypocrisy? What's going on with that?
Sure. Yeah, Bill, I think that the scandals and hypocrisy, as I'm sure you would concur, they've always been there, but they are brought to light a lot more in a social media culture. So, when somebody does something wrong, I mean, it's out immediately on the web. And so I think that contributes to it. I think another thing is that God is exposing this in the church. When you think of Carl Lentz, kind of showing himself as a sports agent while he's dating the Muslim, James McDonald and kind of his anger issues, Bill Hybels and some of the inappropriate sexual connection stuff. You've got Brian Houston with Hillsong and Bethel, and Jerry Falwell Jr. and Robbie Zacharias, and you're thinking Mark Driscoll, Rob Bell. I mean, not that he wasn't involved in a scandal in that way, but a doctrinal scandal for sure. Mm-hmm. So all that to say, I mentioned those names because it's already public, but it just gives you an idea like, wow, there has been a lot of people that have been big names that have fallen. And so I think that what we got to realize, though, when that happens is we point people back to Jesus, and we remind people that scandals and hypocrisy is not a Christian problem. It's a human problem. Everybody has scandals. It's just more glaring because of the standard we profess that we should live by as Christians. So I think in answer to the objection, like, well, should I walk away or give up on Jesus or give up on the church on account of scandals? I would say we wouldn't want to do that, because that would be equivalent to saying if scandals and hypocrisy, exist in the church, then Christianity isn't true. Scandals and hypocrisy exist in the church, therefore Christianity isn't true. Well, premise one is obviously faulty, because Jesus knew that there were scandals and hypocrisy that existed in the church. In fact, he came, pointed out the problem, but he became the solution in dying for our scandals and hypocrisy on the cross.
Yeah, that's so good. I like that you bring out that syllogism there, and why it fails. So another question, another thing that's going on right now in the church, I guess in our culture, that's kind of led a lot of people away from the church, is that they've gotten this idea that the church or Christianity is non-accepting. You have a whole section in your book that deals with things that we've probably all heard about, whether it's Christianity and religion being used as oppression, or being non-accepting of LGBTQ, or the racism and abortion. Can you hit on some of those things and kind of dive into that a little bit for us?
Absolutely. Of course, the church has had a black eye and has gotten things wrong. There has been scandals. There has been hypocrisy. There has been oppressive Christians. I think that the part that I would want to address, though, is we don't walk away from Christianity on account of some of the bad press. We looked at Jesus. Jesus did not condone us being oppressive to people. Jesus came to set the captives free. He says, "And you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free." So if Jesus is the truth, if Christianity is the truth, then to walk away from Christianity would be to walk away from the truth, and that would be to walk away from the truth on account of those who failed to live up to it. And so I think that sometimes people are just looking for an excuse to walk away from Christianity, like as if we can maybe blame it on something, right? Like this can justify my reasons. This can give me ammo for why I don't accept it, and why I don't like that. That's been part of the history. I mean, that people have used the Bible to promote slavery, and that men have used their headship in toxic ways. Not all men are toxic in their masculinity, and other people were using the Bible to show that the Exodus story. In fact, the African American culture was heavily influenced by the Exodus story in discovering their hope. So I do think that it's helpful just to remember that when you've got different people working over the Bible, and especially the enemy, I mean, he's going to twist every doctrine up that we have possible to try to make it problematic. He knows that his time is short, and so he's going to do everything he can do to blind us to the truth, to deceive us, to cause us to reject the truth. And so there's a lot of bad press out there. So even as it relates to the whole LGBTQ community, sure, there's been Christians that have been unloving, and they've been rude, but by and large, that's just not the narrative I think that we do see in the church. I think that what's happening is people are putting up the extreme stories because that's what they want to focus on. Sean McDowell got invited to go on a TV station once to talk about some of this stuff, and then the producer dismissed him. He said, "Oh, you're way too friendly. We can't have you. You're too compassionate." Right? We need more drama. So that's what's so unfortunate. I was telling my wife last night, we watched the news, and it's a shame, because really what you have is people aren't looking to share kind of the middle of the road, everyday living stuff. They're looking for the extreme stories, because that's what's going to get hits. That's what's going to keep them on the payroll. And so we have to deal with the extremes and use discernment and looking through it. I've been a Christian, Bill, for 30 years. I don't know of a single Christian in my 30 years that would have said we need to be unloving to the LGBTQ community. In fact, if anything, I've seen Christians bend over backwards, so much so that they've went ahead and they've cast aside what the Bible teaches about it, because they've wanted so much to show love that they didn't stay faithful to the scriptures because they've been love shamed. And so today we're in this position: if you don't celebrate me, then you don't love me. Well, now it's no longer the Bible defining what love is, it's the culture telling us what it looks like for us to love them. Means that we have to partake and celebrate and align with the cultural values. That's going to be love for them. Well, that's tough, but unfortunately we have to be discerning enough to know that the Bible calls us to speak the truth and do that in love.
Yeah, I think that's the part of 1 Corinthians 13 that a lot of people kind of want to stop at, that part where, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but love rejoices in the truth. And that's a very interesting phrase that you use there, love shamed. I've heard it put another way, that the world weaponizes our compassion against us.
Yes.
And I think it's very astute of you to mention the idea that some Christians have bent over backwards to the point that they've strayed from the biblical teaching about those things. And so that's
just not fair too, because I can say this, like, we're living in a culture where a lot of people, I think they'll be ready to coerce us into their beliefs, but that's not love. In fact, as Christians, I would go to bat in a second as a pastor and an apologist to say we should never coerce our teachings on people. All we want to do is have the opportunity to live it out. We want to show that by living for Jesus, that it's a better culture that it'll create. Right? I mean, look at the mess that we're in right now. We've so highly prized sexuality. We're a genital obsessed culture. You have people that don't even think they could be married now because they're just addicted to sex so much that now we're saying, well, let's just have polyamory. Let's just lose marriage as a category altogether. And I think it's not so much about we're getting more broad. I think it's that I don't think I could be a faithful human being. I don't think I have the integrity to exercise self-control to one person throughout my life. So now let's just celebrate polyamory. So we lower the moral standard to fit our appetite so that we don't have to feel guilt and we can feel good about it. But then all you got to do is fast forward 20 years and go, well, what's the culture going to look like when these kids grow up and they just got a bunch of parents that are obsessed with their genitals, obsessed with sexual output, and that's the kind of, it's obsessed with their hedonism, see kids as a burden. I mean, it's just going to be complete anarchy versus a Christian that says, I don't want to force this down your throat at all, but I would love the opportunity to live for my Savior and show you what it looks like to love my spouse faithfully, to raise our kids, to be honest, to work hard, to tell you the truth, to be servants, to be generous, to be forgiving, to have a good work ethic. Like, why wouldn't you want those values in our culture today? Like, that's what the Christians want. But of course, we're having different things. The narrative's getting painted in the extreme about us.
Yeah. Changing some of those definitions to fit what they want to do and how they want to live, and then trying to turn that back on us and against us as Christians. And moving on to like our goal, you kind of touched on this a little bit, is we just want to be able to share the love of Christ. And I have a background in missions. I actually had a missions major when I was in college. And I remember having a discussion that when I was reading your book that really stood out to me, that I came back to my memory. Because as a missions major with a focus on unreached peoples groups, that question comes up of, if Jesus is the only way, how do we what happens with people that never had a chance to hear his name? And I remember having a discussion, almost an argument with a classmate about this, based on like, well, that means that if I'm studying, I'm just going to these unreached people groups and giving them the opportunity to reject Jesus, where they might be saved if I just left them alone. But in your book, you talk about some of those positions, and you hold a position called what you call soft exclusivism. Can you parse that out for us a little bit?
Sure. This is a challenging piece, no doubt. But I was in India traveling in the 1040 window, and the most unreached people groups, of the world is the 1040 window. And as I was there, I just found myself thinking, so have all these people just been born to die to go to hell because they never heard the information piece of the gospel?
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, it just didn't sit well with me, because we say that, the reason that we go to hell, like we don't get to experience heaven, is because we didn't believe in Jesus. Well, how can it be just to get separated from God for not believing in Jesus if you never heard of Jesus? So I think that there's some different things that have happened. We could say, okay, God could give you a dream, God could give you a vision. I get that. He has done that a lot in the Islamic world. But it doesn't seem like dreams have been enough to create an absolute transformational culture with the gospel. You have these stories of dreams where people are getting saved, and that's great, but they don't necessarily know what to do with the dream in the sense of more content outside of the fact that they believe that Jesus appeared to them. So the hard exclusivist is going to say, yeah, these people die and they go to hell, and then and God is just. But I would say, if A implies I ought to believe, but B implies that I can't believe, then how am I responsible for something that I could never have done because I never heard? So then someone could maybe go with more of a Molinist middle knowledge position, that God knows what these people would have done had they heard the gospel. So maybe that would be the position that someone could take on a hard exclusivist. But I do think with soft exclusivism, it's still saying Jesus is the only way to heaven, and you get to heaven through Christ. In the same way in the Old Testament, like if you respond to general revelation and creation and conscience, that if God wanted to look down, and I can't guarantee this, but I do think that you can make some kind of a case that people were saved because of what Jesus did, and the benefits of the cross could be applied to them because they put their faith in a creator God that they recognized as good, and they recognized that they offended him and asked for forgiveness. So if somebody said, God, I don't know who you are, but I believe you're there, and I believe you created me, and I ask for your forgiveness, and I ask you to be merciful to me and help me to know you. And if God wanted to give the benefits of the cross to that person, I would not be disappointed when I got to heaven on that, and I could still see that Jesus took care of it. Otherwise, you're in this position of saying, on the day that Jesus said it is finished, people that are too geographically far away, where the gospel wouldn't get to them for several decades, well, they're just hosed. Had they believed the day before on natural revelation, they would have been okay. But now that Jesus said it is finished, they're hosed. And that just seems a little weird to me too. But that's kind of a position I hold to, yeah.
Yeah, I think we ended up discussing this with a missions professor because it was just weighing on us so heavily. And the bottom line we kind of came to at that time was, God is a just God. We know that, but God is also a very loving and compassionate God. So in the end, we don't fully know the situation, but I think what you described there with that soft exclusivism really, I think it makes a lot of sense and offers a lot of hope and understanding to the situation. And so I love what you talk about in the afterword. The book is over, and you have this afterword at the end, a way forward for the church. And I just thought that was an incredible discussion, really for Christians and the church in general. And leaders in the church. And it goes back again to this missions mindset that I've always had. You pull out this idea that we need to contextualize the gospel as if we were missionaries, contextualizing it to a different foreign culture. But our culture is so different today that we need to contextualize the gospel and adopt this missionary or missional mindset. And I think you said in this in your book, it says, if we hope to be effective, we must adopt a missionary mindset in the church. And part of the problem is that many people in the church haven't been taught to think. They want to feel something or do something. We must think for the sake of the Great Commission. And I love that. If can you kind of walk throughout what does it mean to have a missional mindset for the church?
So we are thinking like missionaries. In the past, it's true. When I became a Christian 30 years ago, the culture in a lot of ways shared the same values as the church. It was respectable to be a part of the church. But so much of that has changed as different philosophies have really taken root, like deconstructionism that we see and different critical theories, LGBT stuff. It's almost like a religion in and of itself that we can see with some of the different critical theories that have shown up. Cultural Marxism. Right. People no longer love the country. They're not thankful to be an American. And in myself included, I'm thankful to be an American, but I'm not thankful for where America is today. It's like, I don't feel the sense of pride in being American as I once did. And so I do think that when the church and the culture share some of the same values, you can go out and you can share the gospel, and the culture's kind of primed with what sin is. So if you were to go out, picture even in the 50s, and you go out and talk about divorce or, premarital sex or, adultery or stealing or drugs, people, pornography, people would be thinking, I need forgiveness of this. Mm-hmm. Well, now the government's legalized a lot of this stuff, and this stuff is celebrated. And now that it's celebrated, what ends up happening is the culture that we're living in, we can't really just go out in the same way and start with sin, because they're going to say, what's sin? So we have to be aware of their mindset. And so here's the thing I can guarantee is that there are consequences for the decisions that people are making. I was saved out of alcoholism. I was very promiscuous with the girls when I was younger. I was trying to cover my tracks all the time as I was cheating on my girlfriend, mixing everything up, lying, stealing. There was so much. My life was a complete wreck, Bill. And we're not hearing about the consequences as much. We're just hearing about, we're being liberated. But I think we're creating our own gallows that we're going to hang from. And so what I suggest then, thinking like a missionary, then we don't meet people immediately with sin. What we meet people with kind of like the consequences. Like how's your worldview working for you? Like how's it going to work for you just to have sex with whoever you want? Looking at porn however you want, drinking without any boundary. How's that working for you? And then we could begin to talk about like missing the mark, like God's got an ideal. But I do think we have to spend a lot more time. We can start with the consequences. Then we got to talk about the why behind the what, like what we're not to do, for example. Well, why? Why would God want us to consider being, why would God want sexuality for the context of marriage? Well, because if we were to follow his ways, there would have never been an STD, because he doesn't want us to have to be covering our tracks, being paranoid about affairs, because he doesn't want us to be loaded down with guilt and shame, because he wants us to be able to have self-control and not be given into every impulse, because he wants us to be secure in our relationship with each other, not paranoid, because he wants us to be able to trust each other, because he wants us to be able to build a home. He wants us to be models of faithfulness. And I'm thinking all of a sudden, wow, well, God gets a bad rap for having a context for sex. And it's like a pastor once said, if I invited you into my house and I took the firewood and started building a fire in the middle of my family room, I would burn the house down. Yeah. But if I took that same firewood and put it in a fireplace in a context, it'd keep us warm. Well, we've taken the firewood out and we've lit a match in the family room and we're burning down the house of our nation.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful stuff there. Well, I appreciate you coming on so much. There's so much more I'd love to be able to talk about, but you will just have to get the book, ladies and gentlemen. Does Christianity Still Make Sense? By Bobby Conway. And Bobby, there it is right there. Great book. as we go, first of all, I guess if you wouldn't mind just telling us where we can find you, and before you do that, if you can give just maybe something like, if there's someone out there that's doubting, going through that season of doubt, doesn't want to just give up on Christianity, what kind of brief final word would you have for them? And then tell us where we can find you and follow you.
Yeah. So I would encourage people to get the book, because I do talk about, how to work your way out of a place where Christianity doesn't make sense, where you can see how it still makes sense again. And it's written in a biographical way. It's on Audible. It's on Amazon. It also has a study guide that you can get. It's set up in such a way that moms and dads could take their kids through the book, and even the study guide, and talk at dinner time. Give your kids a Christian worldview, because they're going to meet these kind of questions. So that's all at Amazon. If they want a video series, they can go over to Tyndale, and Tyndale Publishing flew my son and I up, and he's a Gen Zer, and he interviews me in her 6-10 minute interviews, and we're talking about kind of why his generation struggles so much with doubt and how to handle that. And so it's a father-son conversation. So there's several tools that are here with this book that people can use. And I think that my advice would be, look, don't throw the towel in. Don't quit before the miracle happens. Jesus can handle your doubts. Doubt it's not a Christian problem. It's just, we're human, and we have finite brains. And no matter what we believe, the atheist has doubts at times. C.S. Lewis talked about that. There were times when I was an atheist and the whole thing didn't make sense. And now that I'm a Christian, there's times it doesn't make sense. I just don't think we can 100% escape doubt if what we're looking for is 100% certainty. So we need to have a reasonable evidence, and we need to know what that looks like. And so this book will do that. It'll walk you through over 20 objections, some of the biggest ones today that we get hit with, and some of the tough, timeless ones that we get hit with as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much to my guest, Bobby Conway. Appreciate you coming on here.
Thank you, Bill. It was great to be with you, bro.
Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode with the great Bobby Conway. And I hope that you got something out of it. And if you did, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us here at Encountering Truth. You can email at bill@encounteringtruth.org, or you can go to our website, encounteringtruth.org. Check that out. Share this episode with your friends, and on social media, follow our Facebook page, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast and click that bell icon so that you get notified that every time a new episode comes out. So thanks again. And remember, we make it our goal to examine the evidence, engage culture, and encounter Jesus. God bless. We'll see you next time.